I would ask you now just to touch your brother and sister on either side of you. Just touch them simply so that you're praying as the body. You're praying as people who want to be the body of Christ and not as individuals. Lord God, we believe that this is a new Pentecost. We believe in what you do in our lives.
Praise you, Jesus. Praise you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Praise you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Hashamana Vatikanna 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 Vatikanna. Praise you, Jesus.
For example, Renewal Ministries, if I just bring something up here, they talk about Father Scanlan like he's, God's prophet or something. If you just do a quick Google search, Renewal Ministries, Father Scanlan, Father Scanlan's amazing prophecy, another prophecy from Father Scanlan, Father Scanlan's 1980 prophecy, amazing prophecy, an urgent word. Ralph Martin's talking about it and all these kinds of things. Various YouTube videos are showing these things. Anyway. This man is in the Charismatic Renewal, this man is the saint. Among other recognized charismatic leaders who appeared was Reverend Michael Scanlan, president of the College of Steubenville. Father Scanlan's appearance at Jesus 78 included his lodging at St. Antoninus, which is likely one of the first times he sexually abused 9-year-old plaintiff who was then with his mother and brothers living at the rectory. Father Scanlan abused plaintiff multiple times. The abuse included things that I don't want to talk about, but you can see them on the screen. Father Scanlan returned to New Jersey several times and abused plaintiff each time he visited St. Antoninus. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. This podcast is going to be a little bit serious, and it is with a heavy heart that I do this show about some information that has been shared with me. I want to give a little bit of background on the journey I've had to sort of investigating this information. I was given some court documents about 1.5 years ago about the late Father Michael Scanlan, who is seen as the godfather of the Charismatic Renewal in the Catholic Church, and he was the longtime head of Steubenville University, a man beloved by many, many people. And the allegations against him, which are going through the courts right now, and another priest, as well as against the People of Hope, which is a covenant community based in the New Jersey area, and against the Archdiocese itself, are very damning. And I've done a significant amount of back-checking, and all the claims of the allegations do seem to match up. That being said, when I received the information about 1.5 years ago, I decided not to go through with it, and instead I shared it with various individuals sort of closer to the problem, because I thought, Father Scanlan is dead, the other priest is dead. This happened 50 years ago, and it's difficult to confirm the actions of someone who is dead. And as much as we want to bring abusers to justice and so forth, when they sort of did the whole getting rid of the statute of limitation things on these cases, it's both a positive and a negative, because on the one hand, there could be things that could be dealt with that were formerly under the, they were hidden because of legal reasons. That's good. On the other hand, obviously, there can be things like false accusations. So when I received the information, I wanted to be very certain that I could do my best to try to sniff out the situation and talk to various individuals close to the source. Everyone will remain anonymous, of course. But I did that. And upon further investigation into Father Michael Scanlan, he does seem to have a track record of being at least a coverer-up of abuse, of spiritual abuse against victims and so forth. And before I get into the allegations of his pedophilia, which are very strong, I do want to go through a little bit of background on Father Scanlan before we do that. So if you don't know who Father Scanlan is, if you do a quick Google search, you will find that he is a very beloved deceased Catholic priest of the Charismatic Renewal. And his Wikipedia page is actually quite accurate, if I'm being honest. It goes through his whole life and the things that he did while he was a priest, and his time at Steubenville and the Charismatic Renewal and so forth. But then there is a section on scandal. So here it says there, A revelation came about in late 2018 that a former chaplain at San Franciscan University of Steubenville, Father Sam Tiezi, had engaged in years-long abuse of women at the university. It has been reported by multiple victims that they made Father Scanlan aware, but he did nothing, or in at least one case verbally assaulted the accuser instead of dealing with the abuse he participated in, covering up and silencing those who would report his close friend, Father Tiezi. And when you do a little bit of investigation into those claims, it does add a significant amount of credence to those accusations. So here is one article by a woman who speaks about this. Now, I want to just say, well, the reason I chose this one is because it's the Catholic Herald from England. It's not some rinky-dink tabloid. They're a place with very legitimate credentials as far as journalism is concerned for Catholics. You can find this information in many other spots as well, personal blogs and so forth. And I will say as well, it does fit the personal testimony that I've received from a number of people who were involved in the renewal, who experienced similar things with other priests, as well as had essentially knowledge of these sorts of things going on as well in this setting that we're concerned with here. And we're going to read through some of this, and then I'm going to get into the case against Father Scanlan, which, by the way, the documents are public in the New Jersey court system. So I imagine there will be some legitimate sort of mainstream journalists who will want to pick this up. Go for it. You can find the court's documents in the New Jersey court. They were filed in late 2020. I can't believe no one has talked about them until now. And you just have to sign up through the login thing for the New Jersey courts, but it's free and it's public. They have a public access option. And the whole thing is there. Right now, it's almost 450 pages or something like that with all the motions filed and so forth. But the actual details of the case are completely public. So in any event, let's just look at this article quickly here. So this was a former student of Steubenville, and she talks about having this deep relationship with Father Scanlan. And you can see that there. And then we'll just kind of go over here. So deliverance prayers. I went to talk to Father Mike, Father Scanlan, several times for deliverance prayer in case demons were exacerbating my anxiety. This was considered a normal thing to do at Franciscan University of Steubenville. People sought deliverance prayer for all kinds of ailments and especially mental health. Demons were lurking around every corner, and you had to pray just right to get them out. Father Mike used to pray over me and anoint my temples with blessed oil, then give me a smooch on the forehead and a stroke on my cheek. That's very weird. He said he liked me because I remained sweet in spite of the demons. Father Mike referred me to Father David Morier as a confessor. In Father Mike's opinion, he was an excellent man and one who could also help with my demon problem. I trusted Father Mike's opinions of other people's character. Everyone trusted Father Mike and trusted the people he told them to trust. I came to like Father Morier as much as Father Mike, and even invited him to my wedding, where he ended up giving the homily. Father Morier and Father Mike kindly tried to help me when I stumbled into a situation where I was being bullied by another, younger Franciscan priest, but there wasn't much they could do. By the time I got pregnant with my daughter, Father Mike was beginning to lose his memory. He retired to the convent in Loretto, Pennsylvania, shortly before she was born. The last time I saw him, I told him about the pregnancy, and he smiled politely and made the sign of the cross over my swollen belly. But I could tell from his eyes that he didn't exactly remember who I was. The amount of horror that can befall a naive young woman who lives in Steubenville is endless. I got raped, not anything to do with the university. I was absolutely distraught. I thought of my prayer sessions with Father Mike and wished I could talk to him, but he was in Loretto and didn't know me anymore. I called Father Morier and asked him to visit me at my apartment. He came and counseled me, prayed with me, told me that this didn't mean God didn't love me. He closed his eyes chastely when baby Rose latched onto my breast, etc., etc., etc. In 2018, the university admitted this was true. You can see the link. See if it loads here. Allegations concerning Father Sam Tiezi, who was Father Michael Scanlan's best friend. Okay. The university admitted what had been common knowledge in some circles all along. Father Sam Tiezi was a sexual predator. Later it came out in the news that Father Michael Scanlan had been notified about this and had protected his dear friend. He'd gone to horrible lengths to shield Father Sam from consequences, even slandering and yelling at the victims. He put the whole campus in danger, and then in the end, after Father Sam was dead, he told one of the victims that he knew they were telling the truth all along. The same year, another news article was released talking about the culture of rape and cover-ups at Franciscan. One of the victim reports that Father Morier told her to go to therapy and confession instead of the police. Anyway, now, this obviously is an article written by someone who has been victimized, and obviously it's colored with emotion and things like that. But it is true that Father Scanlan has been implicated after his death in cover-ups of this notorious predator father, Sam Tiesi. And this is just one example of many of these concerns about Father Scanlan. And quite frankly, I didn't know about these things at all when I had first received this information that we're going to read in a second here about the pedophilia. But when I started unearthing more and more things that had happened under his watch, I realized that, to me, it seems like where there's smoke, there's fire. And as I said, we'll see the details that are in this allegation thing. Do check out. Now, I do want to add as well, this is not indicative of anyone at Steubenville. There are plenty of wonderful people at Steubenville University. I know people that are a part of that university in various ways, and they're wonderful human beings. And it is also possible that evil things can be happening around you, and you have no idea, and you're not responsible for it at all. We can all remember, for example, the Legionaries of Christ. To be honest, one of the best priests I ever dealt with when I was coming back to the faith was a legionary priest, and I'm forever grateful for that man. And I have no reason to believe that he was implicated in any problems. And I didn't even know anything about the legionaries at the time. This was back in, I think, 2014, 2015. And I didn't know anything about the scandal. And I know many people have gone through the legionary system and never encountered abuse and were good men. And they were horrified about what came out. So please do not take this as some sort of blanketed, indiscriminate attack on Steubenville or every priest or anything involved with that. That would be absurd. I would never do that. But this is a very important thing to deal with right now. Also, I want to say before I continue, one of the reasons why I decided to sit on this information for so long, it was because, quite frankly, I just thought it was going to get picked up by someone in the mainstream news, and I didn't want to be involved in that sort of church militant arena. But since church militant is gone and that sort of tabloid Catholicism has kind of ceased in many ways, I kind of thought about it more and more. I prayed about it for a long time. And the reason I wanted to talk about it as well is because there are certain questions that have to be asked about the church's approach to canon law and how the church protects abusers through certain canonical loopholes, which we'll go over briefly near the end of the video. And so I wanted to present it not as a sort of tabloid thing, but as something to consider. And also, I understand there will probably be many people watching this who have things to say, who have ways to corroborate it, who have similar experiences, maybe who even knew of these things, but were too scared to do so. You can reach out to me through the description area. There's a link underneath, and I promise you I've been doing research into the covenant communities, which we'll talk about briefly in this video as well. And I'm doing these interviews with people, and they're completely anonymous. No voice, no video, just taking notes and sort of doing it that way to protect people's identities. So if you have things that you want to add, feel free to email me. I do get a lot of emails, so I'll do my best to reply as soon as possible, just so we know. Okay, so let's bring up this document from the court here. So I've redacted out the name of the plaintiff. He's not a minor or anything. He's a grown man now. But I've taken it out just because, quite frankly, this is public information, but I don't know if he wants to be in that sort of thing in the public eye, although I'm sure it will be at some point. But anyway, that's just, the nature of these sorts of things is I'm sure he must have expected there would be some sort of public news story on this. I can't see how this won't become major news in the church. Nonetheless, I didn't want to be the one to reveal his name. But again, if you go through the New Jersey court thing, you can see up here, it was filed in, oops, that's the redacting thing. It was filed in late 2020. Okay. So here's the rub. Plaintiff so-and-so is an individual who as a minor was sexually assaulted and abused by Reverend Joseph Fagan and Reverend Michael Scanlan. Now, Fagan is on a watch list for abusers, by the way, as well, if you look him up. each while acting in his capacity as a brother, priest, and or reverend assigned to and or employed by defendants, St. Teresa of the Little Flower School and or St. Antoninus Church and or the People of Hope, which is a covenant community, and or the Archdiocese of New York and or John, Jane Doe's, etc. Defendant, St. Antoninus Church is a nonprofit, blah, blah, blah. Defendant, Archdiocese of New York is a nonprofit, etc., etc. Defendant, the People of Hope is a corporation entity with its principal place of business in Plainfield, New Jersey. And it says here that the defendant, John, Jane Doe's 1 to 10 and ABC entities are fictitious names, etc., 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 who were involved in oversight, responsibility, whatever, and at all times material hereto and or were involved in the decision-making that allowed Reverends Fagan and Scanlan to abuse this person and others. So there are other victims as well. It goes over the jurisdiction of the court, talking about it, etc. So here is what happened. Now, I'm not going to read every single word because some of it is disgusting to read, but if you are looking at the screen, you can see it. In the early 1970s, Father James Ferry, a pastor of St. Antoninus, co-founded the People of Hope, again, which is a covenant community, with the Archdiocese's knowledge, authorizing, and endorsement, used St. Antoninus as the New Jersey Center of People of Hope operations. Father Ferry welcomed the People of Hope clergy and others to St. Antoninus, allowing non-diocesan clergy to stay overnight at the rectory and establishing a men's residence at the rectory in which various People of Hope guests would have rooms while visiting, and some with long-term residency living in New Jersey. All of this had the support and was subject to the oversight of the diocese. Moreover, the Archdiocese exercised authority over People of Hope, maintained audit authority over its financial records, and reserved the right to approve the Archdiocese's priests who joined the People of Hope movement. Now, I want to give a tiny background on the People of Hope and the covenant communities in general. I'm going to be doing some more work on covenant communities. I've got lots of documents I have to go through. The covenant communities, people will say those are not really part of the charismatic renewal. That's not true. As you can see here in the early 70s, the charismatic renewal started in 1967, and already within 2 or 3 short years, you have these official entities being set up. They were modeled after these essentially Pentecostal cultish communes. The progenitors of the renewal, the Ranahans, Ralph Martin, and so forth, they were all involved in these things, even heading them up at times. Mary Healy as well was involved with one. There was plenty of public information about how these places, in some cases, even had to be broken up by anti-cult networks, which was the case with one in Maryland, which you can find the Washington Post archives talking about that. I've spoken with survivors of that place. I've spoken with survivors of the one in Michigan, the Christ the King one there. I've had emails and letters from people all over the United States, all saying that these things were consistent across all these places. And there's a huge amount of abuse, spiritual and physical, both sexual and in other ways of physical, like corporal punishment and so forth, that was taking place in all these places. Of course, not every single person involved with them is guilty of that. But nonetheless, these things are not an aberration. They're not an exception to the charismatic renewal. They're there from the very beginning. And the progenitors of the renewal, especially the Ranahans, who I've talked about at length, they were right there at the forefront establishing these things as the sort of logical conclusion of how to live the charismatic renewal. So I'm sorry when people say these are exceptions, they're not. Most people aren't a part of them, but they are fundamental to the charismatic movement, and they involved priests, they involved the permissions of diocese, they involved lay people, they involved scandal and financial scandal and cults and all these kinds of things. These covenant communities have largely ceased to be the way that they were. Many of them are still in operation sort of mainly as kind of prayer centers and not the same as they used to be. There are still some. But you got to understand that in the early and mid-1990s, these places came under a lot of scrutiny, and they were basically smacked down by their bishops, which is saying a lot considering the amount of nonsense and terrible, malarkey that is allowed in your average diocese since the Second Vatican Council. The fact that these things were smacked down is telling you that they were even beyond the pale for the Novus Ordo paradigm, which is saying a lot considering what is allowed in a diocese today and has been for decades. And so the People of Hope is just one of those. And there have been plenty of survivors who have come out of that cult talking about the craziness that comes out. And it is consistent across the United States in all of these communities. And there are plenty of survivors who have spoken about it, but no one really wants to give them any credence. And I think a lot of them are scared because of obviously not wanting to be in the public eye and so forth. But anyway, that's a little background on People of Hope. And you can look up the People of Hope, and you can find plenty of testimonies of people who were there that are consistent with the rest of them in the Charismatic Covenant communities. And it's just an absolute cultish disaster. And that's what the facts are, whether they're uncomfortable or not. Back to this thing. Beyond being simple parishioners of St. Antoninus and members of the Archdiocese, plaintiff and his family were residents in the Archdiocese's St. Antoninus Rectory. So this young man at the time was living there with his family. In 1978, and with the blessing and support of the Archdiocese and then Bishop Peter Garrity, Father Ferry organized and produced the People of Hope gathering dubbed Jesus 78, held at the New Jersey Meadowlands. Among other recognized charismatic leaders who appeared was Reverend Michael Scanlan, president of the College of Steubenville. Father Scanlan's appearance at Jesus 78 included his lodging at St. Antoninus, which is likely one of the first times he sexually abused 9-year-old plaintiff who was then with his mother and brothers living at the rectory. Father Scanlan abused plaintiff multiple times. The abuse included things that I don't want to talk about, but you can see them on the screen. Father Scanlan returned to New Jersey several times and abused plaintiff each time he visited St. Antoninus. Plaintiff also experienced multiple incidences of inappropriate contact with other clergy members who were guests at the quote-unquote men's residence. And I will add as well, this is consistent with these charismatic covenant communities where there is this inappropriate intimacy between parishioners and lay people living and staying and sleeping in the same residence, and it's very strange. Along with its responsibility for the management and oversight of the parishes, the Archdiocese has a duty to supervise, etc., etc. It goes on to why the Archdiocese is responsible. They say the Archdiocese took no steps to screen the people it allowed at St. Antoninus. This was reckless and in intentional disregard for the safety and welfare of these young children, including the plaintiff. Father Scanlan abused plaintiff while he was living at the St. Antoninus Rectory. Father Fagan sexually and mentally abused the plaintiff while he was a student at St. Teresa of the Little Flower School. On multiple occasions during the mandatory practice of confession, Father Fagan would make comments about the plaintiffs, etc., and request that the plaintiff, etc., 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 discussing things I don't want to talk about. Plaintiff told his mother about the abuse by Father Scanlan, and his mother reported it to the priests of St. Antoninus. The priests at St. Antoninus ignored the complaint without conducting an investigation. In 1996, plaintiff reported the abuse to Father Paul Lehman, the then serving pastor of St. Antoninus. And I want to just pause here. One of the reasons why, through the back-checking, is it's not as if this person, decided to talk about it 50 years later with never talking about it. It was brought up to the diocese. It was brought up to the parish and so forth, and they did nothing about it. And we're going to go in near the end of the video why that happens. There's a loophole in canon law. But I also want to just show you, I should say, so as I continue doing more research, this isn't something that seems like it's just made up. This is a long-standing problem that there is evidence, and if you read the court files on the New Jersey website, New Jersey court website, you can find all the things filed for evidence of all these things. So you can request to have access for those if you want, if you're a journalist out there. In any event, I should also add too, if it turns out by some miracle that Father Scanlan is innocent, then I will be the first person to do a video showing that, and I will take this down. I don't want this to be true for 1,000 reasons, not least of which for the victim, of course. No one wants it to be true, but also for no one wants to falsely accuse a priest. But I'm sorry, there's just no way to get around. It seems like a slam dunk. Also, I want to show here. You saw that it said Father Scanlan was at this thing called Jesus 78, which was this thing at the Meadowlands in New Jersey, the football stadium. I'm going to show you. Father Scanlan's on film there, so this is corroborated as well. I'm just going to bring that up. So this is Jesus 78, and whatever, you can see that.
In the same assembly with us. I would ask you now just to touch your brother and sister on either side of you. Just touch them simply so that you're praying as the body. You're praying as people who want to be the body of Christ and not as individuals. Lord God, we believe. We believe that this is a new Pentecost. We believe in what you do in our lives.
Praise you, Jesus. Praise you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Praise you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Hashamana Vedikanna 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 Vedikanna. Praise you, Jesus.
Okay, so it's one of those charismatic events. I want to show you two, just so you know I'm telling you the truth. His name, Father Scanlan, is across the screen.
Rivalry or
Father Michael Scanlan. Anyway, the whole thing, speaking in tongues, Hashamama, Mashamama, etc. He was there. Okay, so that's another piece of evidence that these facts do check out. And I also want to show you that the other Father Fagan, see if I can find that quickly for you here. So here is a video from a law firm, and I'm not going to play it, but whatever. It just has music in the background and things like that. And honestly, I'm not sure about copyrights, but in any event, Father Joseph Fagan, it goes on to talk about, many victims have said this and that. Anyway, here's the money thing. It shows his assignment list. Here's his assignments, and you can see here Little Flower, 68 to 78. And that corresponds with what has said in this thing. And that's important to think about. And it goes on, he retired and just sort of moved around and whatnot. And anyway, multiple victims besides the gentleman involved in this thing. It's been something corroborated by tons of different people. So let's go back to the document. Okay, so here are the counts of abuse and so forth. So defendants Michael Scanlan and Joseph Fagan engaged in criminal sexual contact with the then minor plaintiff, including but not limited to multiple incidents of sexual abuse. These incidents occurred on the premises of St. Antonius Church in Newark, New Jersey, and on the premises of St. Teresa Little Flower School, as we saw in that law firm's thing where Father Fagan served. And then obviously it's going into his, injuries and so forth. And then also, this is a claim of negligence and or gross negligence by the diocese, the church, and the covenant community. And it's I just want to read the sort of money lines here. Defendants, the St. Antonius Church, People of Hope, Archdiocese of Newark, and the various people involved are responsible by their knowledge and actions and or inaction, as if all allegations subsequently set forth herein pertaining to all defendants were set forth herein as to these said defendants. The acts of said defendants described above were undertaken and or enabled by and or during the course and or within the scope of their appointment and or agency within the parish. At all times material hereto, said defendants knew or should have known of the unreasonable danger to plaintiff and other minors due to Scanlan and Fagan's sexual propensities of pederasty, frotteurism, and or pedophilia. Said defendants owed plaintiff a duty to protect him directly and or indirectly from Scanlan and Fagan's sexual deviancy, both prior to and or subsequent to Scanlan and Fagan's misconduct. But for said defendants' knowledge of Scanlan's and Fagan's failures to control their sexual disorders and or their sexual propensities of pederasty, frotteurism, and or pedophilia, and their willful, wanton, and grossly negligent acts of commission and or omission, plaintiff would not have been sexually abused, etc. This is an allegation of intentional misconduct or gross negligence versus the church, the People of Hope, and the diocese. Prior to the dates of sexual molestation perpetrated by Michael Scanlan and Joseph Fagan, said individuals had been known or should have been known to defendants to have been a pederast, frotteurism, pedophile, and or other sexual offender with the habit of making sexual advances or engaging in unnatural sexual acts with children under the pretext of their duties as priests and utilizing their positions as priests to overcome the reluctance and fears of those children. After knowing that Father Scanlan and Joseph Fagan had utilized their positions as priests to lure and persuade children to commit sexual acts with them, the defendants deliberately and or outrageously allowed them and or assigned them positions as brother, priest, reverend, teacher, deacon, trustee, director, officer, employee, agent, servant, and or volunteer at a parish and or school where they would have full access to children, including the plaintiff, who had no awareness of their deviant sexual preferences and practices. It goes on to say they breached their duty of care and so forth. Defendant Michael Scanlan and Joseph Fagan, by force, deception, religious duress, and intimidation, caused plaintiff to engage in sexual conduct with them. The sexual abuse of plaintiff by defendants Michael Scanlan and Joseph Fagan proximately caused plaintiff to suffer extreme humiliation and anxiety, severe emotional distress, nightmares, and so forth. I mean, I can't imagine. Defendants Michael Scanlan and Joseph Fagan acted either intentionally or recklessly and knew or should have known that their actions would result, etc., into problems. I'm not sure if there's really any point in reading any more here. It's sort of just going over these things as well. Although this is interesting. Defendants had actual or constructive knowledge that Michael Scanlan and Joseph Fagan were sexual offenders and had propensities of pederasty, frauderism, and or pedophilia involving children. Defendant had a duty to exercise reasonable care, etc. And it just goes on to say why the diocese and the oversight did not do well. Of course, they're going to go after the diocese for this. I do want to bring up something from the People of Hope, though, real quickly here. I just want to find that for you. So here the document talks about there was essentially a concealment, basically a cover-up. Wrong thing there, sorry. And I want to go through that here. Upon information and belief, defendants, so that includes the People of Hope, Covenant, Charismatic Community, and the priests as well, motivated by their desire to prevent unseemly information from being disseminated, to prevent criminal prosecution, and to minimize disgrace and scandal, and by their desire to retain the active services of brothers, priests, and or reverends, and or to manifestly and impliedly protect said defendants' perception of the rights of such adult brothers, priests, and or reverends, over and above the rights and safety of potential minor victims, under the laws of the state of New Jersey and or the United States, thereby gambling with and or egregiously endangering the safety of such victims, agreed to enter into a conspiracy, conspired to, and did fraudulently conceal and or misrepresent their knowledge, negligence, and activities from plaintiff. Said defendants engaged in a course of conduct including, but not limited to, the making of and or permitting of an environment of secrecy, the making of false representations, promises, religious duress, the failure to disclose information, the suppression of material facts designed to prevent victims such as plaintiff from timely discovering and or recognizing the wrongfulness of defendants' actions. So what they're describing is a cover-up. Defendants willfully misrepresented and deliberately misled plaintiff and or failed to warn and or inform him of the following unreasonable reasons. Their interest in protecting Father Scanlan and Joseph Fagan, in particular, and brothers, priests, and or reverends, etc. Their decision for the protection of the school, church, brothers, priests, and or reverends. Because of the plaintiff's position and defendant's position and authority, plaintiff reasonably relied on defendant's misrepresentations and or acts of omission, and so forth. Due in part to the defendant's fraudulent concealment, plaintiff herein lacked actual or constructive knowledge of the factual and or legal basis for the lawsuit, particularly against the defendants, and was prevented from realizing the wrongfulness of defendants' actions and plaintiff's resulting harm. This is important here. I'm going to turn off the redaction thing. Right here. Plaintiff and his family, despite the exercise of due diligence, were prevented from discovering these causes of action set forth herein, and as a direct result of defendant's conduct. At all times material hereto, the actions of said defendants were willful, wanton, malicious, reckless, and outrageous in their disregard for the rights and safety of the plaintiff. Okay. Anyway, you go through more. Again, these documents are available through the New Jersey court website. So, when you take into account everything that has been unearthed about Father Scanlan, Again, I know plenty of people who would like to talk about these things but can't for reasons of anonymity. The fact that this is something, we can check the facts on his residence and Father Fagan's assignments, and we see Father Scanlan there at the thing talked about in the accusation. The fact that Father Scanlan, everyone knew, or many knew, that he did cover up this Father Sam Tiesi, and those things have been admitted by Steubenville that there were problems there. The continual revelations of abuse taking place by priests under Father Scanlan, which is true. The strange behavior of things like kissing on the forehead and all these kinds of things. The problems with the covenant communities and whatnot. Quite frankly, again, this man is dead and it's impossible to know for certain and the fullest extent of the thing. And again, there are problems with the whole taking the statute of limitations off because, again, you can accuse people who are dead and things like that. But as early as the mid-1990s, these things were brought forth and they did nothing about them. This is completely consistent with what has happened, sadly, in this dark era in church history. And it seems that Father Scanlan is just another example of that. Now, I do want to go through something here showing why this is possible and why this happens, because you're thinking to yourself, how could it be the case that this isn't just dealt with? I mean, they're bringing the information forward to the parish priests and things like that, but they just don't deal with it. Well, I'm going to show you something here that talks about why this is actually the case under the present Code of Canon Law. So here is an article by Michael Hitchborn. Michael Hitchborn is an amazing journalist and just kind of all-around investigator of all things corruption, and he does a great job. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but we're going to read some important things. So he starts off with saying, ever since 2022, revelations of deep-seated problems of child sexual abuse by members of the Catholic clergy, the most common question among the faithful remains without an answer: how could this have happened? Since then, scores of reports related to ongoing patterns of sexual abuse and cover-up by the episcopacy have shown that not only has this crisis not been resolved, it isn't likely to end anytime soon. And while many rightfully point the finger at wicked bishops, homosexual networks in the clergy, and the fetid rot in seminaries, the fact of the matter is that all of these are mere symptoms of the issue. One major source of the problem is a legal loophole contained within the Code of Canon Law itself, which directly protects pedophile priests. Simply put, canon law prevents criminal perverts in the clergy from being properly prosecuted and punished. Not only does canon law make it impossible to reveal the homosexual and pederast networks existing among the clergy, but the nature of their perversion prevents punishment. The 1917 Code of Canon Law stood as a bulwark against clergymen who engaged in various forms of sexual perversion by publicly proclaiming their infamy. In essence, those priests caught engaging in sexual abuse of minors, sodomy, incest, and a host of other sexually deviant behaviors were to be declared infamous, meaning their crimes were to be revealed publicly so as to protect future victims, much like the sex offender registry currently in force in civil law. This is what the former code said. If clerics engage in a delict against the sixth precept of the Decalogue with a minor below the age of 16, or engage in adultery, debauchery, bestiality, sodomy, pandering, and or incest with blood relatives or affines in the first degree, they are suspended, declared infamous, and are deprived of any office, benefice, dignity, responsibility, if they have such whatsoever, and in more serious cases they are to be deposed. By immediately depriving such perverts of their faculties and their office, and publicly identifying them for their crimes, the Church provided a clear and rigorous defense of vulnerable members of the Church and maintained the purity of the priesthood. However, just 5 years later, the law was secretly changed so as to conceal these same criminal offenses. In 1922, a secret Vatican document titled Crimen Sollicitationis was republished in 1962, making it an excommunicable offense for any bishop to reveal the criminal offenses of pedophiles, homosexuals, and zoophiles. The document primarily deals with priests who solicit the penitent to engage in illicit or immoral acts, and in dealing with such cases, paragraph 11 of the document says, since, however, in dealing with these causes, more than usual care and concern must be shown that they be treated with the utmost confidentiality, and that once decided and the decision executed, they are covered by permanent silence, instruction of the Holy Office. All those persons in any way associated with the tribunal or knowledgeable of these matters by reason of their office are bound to observe inviolably the strictest confidentiality, commonly known as the secret of the Holy Office, in all things and with all persons, under pain of incurring automatic excommunication ipso facto. Toward the end of the document, the entire procedure in dealing with priests accused of solicitation is extended to clerics accused of homosexuality, pederasty, pedophilia, and bestiality. The term crimen pessimum, the phallus crime, is here understood to mean any external obscene act gravely sinful, perpetrated or attempted by a cleric in any way whatsoever with a person of his own sex. Everything laid down up to this point concerning the crime of solicitation is also valid, and with a charge only of those things with which the nature of the matter necessarily requires for the crimen pessimum. Down here, excuse me, equated with the crimen pessimum, with regard to penal effects, is any external obscene act gravely sinful, perpetrated or attempted by a cleric in any way with the pre-adolescent children or of either sex or with brute animals. Now, why is this the case? Well, I don't have the full answer. This was first done under Pope Pius XI. I have tried to figure out why this was put into place, because I don't believe Pope Pius XI was some sort of crazy, secret, evil person. He was a pretty amazing pope in many ways. Oops. The reason why it was put into place, I've been told, is that this, if you look at the timing of this, is 1922, and a huge swath of the Catholic world had been overtaken by basically socialist and communist revolutionary governments. And the modus operandi of communists was to falsely accuse or to discredit the church by making sort of public their dirty laundry. This happened a million times in the Soviet bloc against priests, and it was almost always false. I think so. The logic is that basically we have to keep the lid on this and we have to deal with this in-house. Now, I don't think there was any intention to just sort of quote unquote cover it up, but the problem remains that it's not exposed to the public. So historically what you've seen is that when these things take place, basically the priest is taken out of ministry and so forth, and then he's just put into a convent or something like that, which effectively is like putting the man in prison. So, I mean, it does deal with the problem in the sense of as long as you take him out. So that's what I've been told as to why it happened. I don't believe it was done for some sort of crazy, evil, vindictive reason. That doesn't fit with the character of the popes in charge at the time at all, and even really the cultural understanding of it. Nonetheless, that does seem to be the reason why it was done. However, of course, this has been used for grave evil. There have been some updates to canon law since then to deal with this. If we continue with the article, he says, of course, over the last 60 years, the secret change in the Code of Canon Law has slowly been made known, and while certain restrictions were lifted, the central problem persisted. In 1962, Crimen Solicitationis was reissued and was later reintroduced under Secretaire Contener in 1982. In 2001, Pope John Paul II lifted some of the restrictions on strict secrecy for bishops in the US and Europe, allowing them to report to law enforcement if required by law. In 2019, Pope Francis somewhat lifted this requirement so that bishops could report to law enforcement anywhere in the world if required. However, secret agreements may remain as have for the last 100 years. In 2021, canon law has changed once again, but problems remain. But here is an important thing. What we see in this modern context, is that the present Code of Canon Law goes further. The 1983 Code is much worse. One can justify, again, just giving benefit of the doubt, dealing with it in-house and not having to deal with the authorities who are against the church in 1,000 different ways, one can understand the rationale for that 100 years ago. 100 years ago, if you found out a man was a pedophile, he might not make it till the morning. That was kind of the culture. So there was a very strong way of dealing with it, I'm sure, in the 1920s and 30s and 40s and 50s when things were a little healthier in the church. I would imagine when these things happened, and they seemed to be much more rare at the time, it probably wasn't this whole sort of cover-up thing. It was more of just deal with this in-house, get them to a convent or monastery, etc. I'm just trying to give benefit of the doubt here. But 1983 makes it a lot worse, and this is why. We'll show you here. So you see here, the Code of Canon Law in 83 instituted this new canon. No one can be punished for the commission of an external violation of a law or precept unless it is gravely imputable by reason of malice or of culpability. So the importance of this is that what this means, as Hitchborn says here, if there is any indication that a crime against the laws of the church was committed as a result of a psychological compulsion and not out of malice, the defender cannot be punished. This is what the most recent respected commentary on the Code of Canon Law says. And you can see this is from the commentary on the Code of Canon Law on things that cannot be punished, among the factors which may seriously diminish imputability in such cases as pedophilia. Pedophiles are often subject to urges and impulses which are in effect beyond their control. It goes on, nevertheless, because of the influence of pedophilia, he may not be liable by reason of at least diminished imputability to any canonical penalty, or perhaps to only a mild penalty, to a formal warning or reproof, or to a penal remedy. Anyway, it goes on to talk about this. You can read this whole thing if you'd like. So, little background. The 1920s canon law was changed to deal with it in-house, but that code of canon law did not contain this whole idea that you're not actually guilty if you have psychological problems. It was just dealt with in-house and was dealt with sort of in a confidential way. One can see the rationale of that. I think that there's a reasonable way to look at that. But the 1983 code, what you see is the effect of the psychologization of everything. And this is consistent with what we read in this case against Scanlan and Father Fagan and the People of Hope in the Diocese of New Jersey. Basically, if someone has quote-unquote psychological problems that are uncontrollable, then they're not guilty of a crime. And it specifically talks about these egregious crimes. This is something that people have to understand. That is the code of canon law that we have right now. So it doesn't matter if you're a traditional order. It doesn't matter if you're a non-traditional, whatever. If you are under the code of canon law of the church, which you are, and this is not the fault of the priest, it's the fault of the legislators, then if a man is caught doing something, if he's assessed by a psychologist or something like that, and they say, well, this is an impulsion, he can't be penalized. That's the problem. And that's something that almost no commentators on news, especially when Church Militant was in operation, this was just not something that was at the forefront. They would say, oh, look, so-and-so is covering it up because blah, blah, blah. The law does not allow them to do anything. So unless you think that the superiors and the bishops and whoever are dealing with it should go and take the guy up behind the woodshed and, say nighty-night, and he's off the face of the earth, which is obviously vigilante justice, and is going to land that man in jail, and getting to vigilante justice is never a good idea. Unless you think that's the solution, what else are they supposed to do? And this seems to be the case with Father Scanlan. If we go back to that case, this is brought forth in the 1990s, and they did nothing. We look at the people with these revelations from Steubenville. They bring it up and they do nothing with Father Scanlan. I'm not imputing the whole university, by the way. This just seems to be the major problem. The major problem is that the Code of Canon Law in 1983 goes a step further than the confidentiality, which one can understand in a certain perspective. Again, maybe I'm wrong, but that's a way of looking at it. One can understand. But the 1983 Code, if you can prove you have a quote-unquote psychological problem, then it's not a crime. Anyway, it's absurd, and that's the main problem. And this is why these men go under the radar. So by the time it's the 1990s and you bring it forth, for all we know, Father Scanlan was talked to by a psychologist or something. And there's no crime because he has these unnatural impulses, which are talked about at length in the document about all this knowledge of these things brought forward. So that's the main problem. So there needs to be reform in the church on the 1983 Code if there's going to be any way forward. Otherwise, it's just a problem. It's a disaster. So anyway, closing remarks here. A lot of organizations, for example, Renewal Ministries, if I just bring something up here, they talk about Father Scanlan like he's, God's prophet or something. If you just do a quick Google search, Renewal Ministries, Father Scanlan, Father Scanlan's amazing prophecy, another prophecy from Father Scanlan, Father Scanlan's 1980 prophecy, amazing prophecy, an urgent word. Ralph Martin's talking about it and all these kinds of things. Various YouTube videos are showing these things. Anyway, this man is in the charismatic renewal, this man is the saint. To me, my gut is telling me this is more like a Martial Maciel situation than it is, Saint Ignatius of Loyola or Saint Francis of Assisi. These founders of religious orders who really were, or movements and spiritualities who really were saints. So this has to be addressed. The people involved, you're going to have to address this and deal with this because there's this legacy of abuse and cover-up that's surrounding Father Scanlan, and now there are very serious accusations which are going through the courts, and that's going to be dealt with, I think, by the end of the year or early next year, if I remember from reading the court proceedings. If you are a journalist who wants to do this, feel free to reach out. I'll send you the document. But please, I ask any journalists who do report on this, can you please do your best to include the information about the 1983 Code of Canon Law, because that is something that people just don't talk about, and it's a real shame. And it affects every single religious order, traditional or not. Under the current code, if you are someone who has quote-unquote unnatural psychological problems or something, then there's really nothing they can do. Thankfully, in some jurisdictions, these things are they're crimes, and then at least in that case they can bring them forth. And we've seen that actually in recent years since it's been lifted. You see more of these cases of priests being brought to the authorities. But if a priest was operating in a time in the 90s or early 2000s, or a superior or a bishop or whoever, they literally couldn't do anything, and that's really the fault of the law. And the journalists out there who are talking about this, they need to go to the source of the matter, and they need to put pressure on the authorities to change legislation, because it's the problem. If you can't get a man in trouble because there's a loophole, then the law is ineffectual. And it just goes to show how deep the crisis in the church is. That even the laws of the church, the legislative activities of the church, which have been changed a ton of different times, even they are protecting the worst people in the church. And, it's amazing to watch that, these modernists and anti-traditionalists and stuff, canon law is their favorite thing, so they can go after the traditionalists. But everyone is just silent on the fact that canon law protects the worst criminals. So please pray for Steubenville University. I know many people there. I know professors and things, and they say it's a great place and there's wonderful things. This is in no way an indictment on Steubenville University as a whole. In fact, this abuse was taking place outside of Steubenville. So that's important to understand. It has more to do with the diocese in question in the early 70s covenant communities and so forth. And pray for the victims. And if you are someone who has any information you'd like to share, feel free to reach out to me. It will be anonymous. I promise, as God is my witness, I would never reveal anyone's private information, ever, who wanted to be a source for anything. If you do want to be on camera, let me know. There's no pressure to. I have plenty of people I'm dealing with right now anonymously, and I will never betray their trust. As God is my witness, I'd rather be hit by a bus than be such a dishonorable, wicked man like that. So I would never do that. And that's all I have to say. Pray for... This is a hard thing too. Pray for the repose of Father Scanlan's soul. Every man is a sinner. I hope he confessed these sins. No one is beyond God's mercy if they repent. So pray for everyone involved. And pray for the victims, of course, most importantly. So, anyway, that's all I have for you today. I'll talk to you soon.